Well, hello, everyone. I'm Frank Fear for the Sports Column, and we're really delighted today to have a special guest, Cassidy Krug, 10-time national champion. Wow, when you think about that, 10-time national champion, member of Team USA, and also participated in the 2012 Olympics in London. Cassidy, thanks so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to chat today.
Great. We're going to talk about a lot of things, including a book that I'm excited about that Cassidy is working on. But I want to start at the beginning, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And your background is absolutely fascinating. Your father, Julian, is a diving coach, collegiate diving coach. And your mother coached you in diving at Montour High School, where you matriculated as a scholar there. So, but I understand also that you became very interested in gymnastics early on and then participated in Junior Olympics. So, but then obviously diving became your focus. So talk to the audience about how that all came about.
I did, yeah. So my parents were both my diving coaches. Rumor has it, and I recently confirmed with my mom that this is true, that I was on the pool deck at my first diving meet when I was 1 week old. I was on my first plane to what I'm assuming was my second diving meet when I was a month old. And it was very much just sort of the family sport. I grew up at the pool, and I consider that to have been kind of like the greatest playground you possibly could have. You know, I was running around the pool deck like a maniac. I was climbing up and down the ladders. I think I was probably jumping in the water before I can swim, which was something I'm sure my parents both loved. But I definitely, diving was always part of my life from a very young age. But I put a little wrinkle into what I'm sure was my parents' original plan when I saw the Olympics on TV in 1988. I was 3 and I saw the gymnastics and I was enthralled. I was a 3-year-old and I was just sitting there mesmerized and, hopping around the floor doing, cartwheels or whatever you can do as a 3-year-old. And so they enrolled me in gymnastics classes, and that honestly was my passion for a long time, from when I was 3 till when I was about 15. Gymnastics was my first sport. Diving was always there. I was always, at the pool. My parents didn't have anything else to do with me. As I got older, in middle school and high school, if I wasn't in a gymnastics practice, I would, join my parents' diving practice. And so I learned, but it's funny, it's hard to even say when I started diving because it was so gradual. Like, was it, at a year or 2 when I was jumping off the boards before I could swim? Was it, when I was 15 and quit gymnastics and started taking diving more seriously? I'm not even sure. And so, yeah, overall, I'm incredibly grateful to my parents for both sort of instilling a passion for sport in me and also letting me decide how I wanted to apply that, and making room and driving me around to gymnastics practices and meets and things like that while that was my passion, and sort of allowing me to come to diving on my own terms.
Then you went on to Montour High School. There, under your mother's tutelage, you were a 3-time All-State diver, 3 times. You made All-America. And you never, is this true? You never lost a dual meet the entire time in high school. Is that true?
I think so. Man, you've done your research. Yeah, absolutely. The whole time in high school, my mom was my official high school coach, and she was the one that kind of went with me to high school meets. I was also diving separately for the Pitt Aquatic Club, which was the program that my parents both ran. So they were both sort of coaching me throughout that time. And as I mentioned, I had kind of been doing gymnastics and diving concurrently. And then I think it was like the summer when I was 15, which might have been maybe the summer after my sophomore year of high school or even freshman year, I found myself doing like 2 diving workouts in the morning, gymnastics workout at night. and dropping into bed every day. And I think I also tried out for the track team at Montour as well my freshman year. There was a lot going on. And then I really started to kind of buckle down and focus. And I think that's really when I started really taking off as a diver. So freshman year, I didn't win state, but then sophomore, junior, and senior years I did. And I totally credit that to my parents being awesome coaches, and Montour really sort of supporting me in my diving as well.
Mm. And another thing, you were National Honor Society during that time, which is an important connection there, not just athletics, but also academics. But I shouldn't say but, and after Montour, you didn't go to Pitt to swim under your father. You went across the country to Stanford. There you made all Pac-12 academic, and you were All-America there too. So the big question is, we talked about this before today, why Stanford?
Right.
And what was it like there?
Oh my gosh. A lot of questions to answer here. So another thing I credit my parents with, in addition to kind of allowing me to find diving on my own and find the passion for that on my own, they didn't want to push me in any particular direction, even though one direction might have seemed obvious at the time. So my dad, made it clear that he would love to have me at Pitt, but also when it came time for recruiting season, he actually had the swim coach recruit me instead, because he wanted to be able to play the role of dad. As I was looking at schools around the country, I was looking at pretty good diving schools at the time, and he wanted to be able to be a guide and a mentor that wasn't super biased as I was making my decision. So I ended up, from the moment I visited Stanford, I felt like there was something different there. It was probably the most academically rigorous school that I visited and looked at. And when I got there, I just had this sense, I'm like, man, it's all nerds like me here. It's all people who are, incredibly motivated in whatever direction they choose to go. And that might be in an athletic direction, that might be in an academic direction, that might be in a classical music direction. It just felt like the people surrounding me were firing on all cylinders towards their passion. And I really appreciated and loved that environment. I also chose Stanford for the coach there, a man named Rick Schiavone. Up until I went to college, my parents very much made diving my decision. If I didn't want to go to practice one day, that was okay. If I wanted to go to practice and kind of take it easy, that was okay. And I made sort of a conscious decision as I was going to college that I wanted to have kind of a step up in intensity, and I wanted to have a coach that would push me sometimes and that would help me get there. And Rick, was that coach. He wasn't going to let me slack off. He was, very kind and well-intentioned and a good man and principled and all of those things. So I trusted him incredibly, but I also knew that he would do what it took to get the best out of me. And that was another reason that I sort of chose Stanford as a school.
Mm-hmm. Great experience. And that really is what college is supposed to be about. But the comment about they were firing on all cylinders really resonates. You're in the right place. I would expect that you set your sights on the Olympics rather early, or what was the critical time or event, or was there one that said, this is my objective, this is what I'm shooting for?
Yeah. So I would say as early as, and actually I know this because I was just recently looking through a bunch of old papers from elementary school. My 5th grade yearbook says my goal is to be in the Olympics. At the time, I wanted to be in the Olympics for gymnastics and not diving, but small things. So I always had this dream of being in the Olympics, raised in a family that is very much within an Olympic sport. It was always sort of this pinnacle But I wouldn't say that I actually believed that I could potentially get there until my freshman year of college. So going to Stanford, I think being surrounded by people with these, huge dreams who are working so hard to achieve them. Working with my coach, Rick, who sort of, pushed me harder than I'd been pushed before. And I worked and I got much better than I had before. My freshman year of college was 2003, 2004. And at the very end of that, I competed in a national meet where I did better than I'd ever done before. And I qualified for Olympic trials, which I hadn't expected to. And then I went to Olympic trials where I went to the prelims and I did kind of better than I ever had before. And I qualified for the finals, which I hadn't expected to. And that was where that journey to the Olympics ended. I wasn't good enough to make the team in 2004, but all of a sudden I was good enough to look into my future and say, this is something, if I keep working at it, I can get a lot better and I can actually make it. And so that was where I would say like kind of the childhood dream turned into what felt like a realistic dream for me.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that strikes me is that timeline from the time you graduated from Stanford and then the 2012 Olympics, the dedication and the focus it takes. And I'll tell the audience, if you have a chance, go on YouTube. I did, to watch Cassidy in the 2011 Nationals. You won a solo and also a synchronized event, two nationals you won, two championships you won. And it's just amazing to me what it takes to be able to do what you did. And then also in my research, I found your father did something when he was a collegian, correct, that no one else had done? Explain that.
Yeah. So I think it was actually for my, I think it was actually a little post-college. So my dad was a diver in college, and then he continued diving for many years after that. I think even after I was born, he was still, diving here and there. It's funny, my motivation in sport has always been sort of to do my competitive best, to get a little bit better, to be a little bit more perfect. Like I've always loved that. One of my dad's motivations was to just kind of do the craziest things he could think of. Like he loves getting a rise out of people. Like even now he's in his 70s, and he'll occasionally get on a diving board and do something called a spotter, which is a somersault. You do your normal diving takeoff, you do a somersault, and then instead of landing in the water, you land back on the diving board. That terrifies people. And so he's always been, even since his own diving days, interested in pushing the limits of what's possible. He got into like diving shows and high diving after college. And he is the first person, as far as I know, to do 5.5 somersaults off of 10 meters. And to put that into context, I think now some of the best Olympians are doing 4.5 somersaults off of 10 meters. And my dad was the first one to just say, let's just see how many times I can flip before I hit the water. And he has that distinction.
Yeah, I bring this up because what a family, just incredible. One of the things we'll talk about a bit later, specifically when you're talking about your book, is the incredible intensity that it takes to be able to achieve the kinds of things you did. And then I don't want to say it's over, but it changes, it shifts, and how difficult that must be for anybody. And I'm sure you're finding in writing your book, there's a range of responses in terms of how people respond to this. And one of the things we talked about in getting ready for today's program was, if you don't have a well-developed philosophy to be able to do what you did, and then to be able to do the pirouette, and to live the rest of your life, I'm not going to say people are going to be in trouble, but you have to have that philosophy. So, and one of the things that fascinated me that I shared with you, I wanted to explore with you today, sort of maybe it's a chicken or the egg situation, which comes first, but you have such a strong family. talk about the influence, their influence on your philosophy, and also being at places like Montour and then Stanford, and also the diving experience, which is a full set of robust experiences that comes together in creating this philosophy. And I know one of your favorite sayings is, it takes about 10 years to become an overnight wonder, which makes sense because of the amount of time you need to put in. Then all of a sudden, oh, I know that name, Cassidy Krug, I know that, but you've been at it for a long time. So talk about your philosophy.
Yeah. So I would say I was very lucky to have mentors in sport who, as different as they were, my parents were very different from Rick, very different from my teammates, everybody did this in a different way. But I was lucky to be surrounded by people who believed it was possible to strive for greatness on multiple fronts. So when I was growing up, my parents did not channel me directly into diving. I explored gymnastics. I loved writing. I enjoyed school, and they supported all those interests. When I got to Stanford, Rick, as intense as he was in the pool, his philosophy, and this is one that I've adopted and tried to adopt in everything else I've done, is when you're here, diving comes first and academics comes first. So it was this idea of, no, you are not just an athlete, but yes, athletics can be important to you, but also so should the rest of your life be important to you. So, when we were stretching before practice, he would ask me, I was an English and creative writing major. He would ask me what I had been reading and what I had been learning. And it was important to him that his divers come away from their, student athlete experience having gained a lot, both as students and athletes. And so it's interesting. So the book that I'm writing right now, which you alluded to, I'm working on a book about what Olympic athletes do after they retire from sports and what that transition is like. And it's interesting for me because I feel like I was set up to have about as good a transition as you could have. I had parents that were super supportive. I had a Stanford education. I had interests outside of sports. To be honest, when I retired from diving after the 2012 Olympics, I felt like I was fully ready to move on from sports and go explore the rest of the world and do something else. And I did. I started in advertising. I sort of worked my way up. I worked really hard, and I always expected that would bring me the same amount of fulfillment that sports had. About 8 years after I started my career, I looked up from my work and realized I wasn't as fulfilled. I was working hard, I was investing a lot, and there was just something missing. So I ended up going on sabbatical from my job and interviewing all of the other Olympic athletes that I could find about their transitions on from sports. And I will tell you that I've talked to 40 athletes at this point, and every story is different. But for every single one of us, the years of dedication you spend, it's your sport is your day-to-day activity. Your sport is your source of pride and accomplishment. If you happen to be in a sport that people pay attention to a lot, you probably get a lot of sort of outside applause and people know you for it. If you happen to be in a sport in which you make money, which diving wasn't necessarily, that's your source of income, it is your everything. And then all of a sudden, at some point that ends and you have to start at the bottom somewhere else. And it's a tricky transition for everyone. And as I mentioned, I feel like mine was relatively good, relatively smooth, but even for me, it was hard to kind of fill the hole that sport had left in my life.
Mm-hmm. When you first talked to me about the book, I said to myself, it's going to focus on Olympic athletes, but it's really for every person, because every person goes through those transitions, sometimes by their own hand, and sometimes they have no choice, but they find themselves in a very different place. I talked about philosophy earlier, but it's also very much a matter of character to be able to deal with these transitions in a functional way. And as you were talking, it made me think of another topic. If that is terminated, not by your hand, but by others. And one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is your feelings about what happened at your alma mater, Stanford, when the athletic department made the decision to cut 11 sports. And they were not what they call non-revenue sports. They were all non-revenue sports, as they're called. But what was interesting to me about the decision at Stanford was these sports, I think there were like 20 national championships collectively have been won by the athletes in those sports. Over 4,000 alumni have participated. It affected 250 students, I think, currently, and something like 30 Olympic medals. Now, the end of the story is a lot of pressure on Stanford. They walked it back, and they reinstated all the sports they said they were going to cut. But what was your thinking as someone obviously connected to Stanford and having a connection to it in a very, very fundamental way, your identity? What was your feeling about that when they announced that?
Yes, I think it must have been back in 2020, and it was, of course, in the midst of pandemic, and morale is just generally low. But I remember seeing that decision and just feeling crushed by it. And it wasn't even like they had cut my sport, swimming, women's swimming and diving was still fully intact. But as I mentioned, one of the things that I valued most about my Stanford experience and that I was proudest of was to be surrounded by people that were all gunning for excellence in different arenas. I was friends with people on the wrestling team, on the crew team, people in all of these, sports. You might call them niche sports, but everybody had their passion and they were going for it. And I think that was always one of the special things about Stanford, was that they supported these niche Olympic sports that many schools don't. And they gave opportunities to these athletes to come get a great education and to pursue greatness in their sports arena. And I think the diversity of that really made for an environment in which it felt like anything was possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really sad to see that streamlining, and financially, I can see the case for it. Like football makes a lot of money, and most of the rest of our sports don't bring in a ton of money for the school. But I think it's really dangerous, and it's a huge shame when you say we only value people that are striving for greatness in these specific arenas as defined by financial success. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of takes away from a culture, and it takes away from this feeling of potential. Mm-hmm. That there are all different ways to kind of reach your own potential and make the most of yourself and contribute to the world.
Yeah, very well stated. And I think we all understand that athletics is a business. There's no question about that at the college level. But when you think about the history and purpose of higher education and using the word amateur athletics, the so-called non-revenue sports, there's something about those sports. I think there are a lot of things that align them very well with what higher education is supposed to be about, the development of the full person. Mm-hmm. And I think what Rick, your coach, told you, he articulated that. And so it was, the good news is that Stanford reinstated those sports, but to go through that process is sometimes very, very difficult. Iowa did it too with a few sports. Others made the cuts, and those cuts remain. And that leads me to the next question, specifically about diving. What do you see as the future for young women who are striving to be like you and other Olympians? What do you see the future of diving 10 to 15 years out? Will it be pretty much the way it is now, or do you think there are macro forces in play that will change it? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I like to be an optimist, and I like to think that diving has a really bright future. On the one hand, competitively, and in terms of, the types of dives people are doing, the difficulty keeps going up and up. You know, on 1 meter, for example, in my day, all the women did 1.5 somersaults, front, back, reverse, or back, reverse, inward, 1.5 somersaults. Now you see a lot more women doing 2.5 somersaults. And so you see sort of the difficulty and sort of the overall level of play rising. And I'm excited to see that happen and sort of how that translates to the Olympic level in the future, 10 or 15 years ahead of us. I think one risk is if the NC2A continues sort of dropping and cutting programs, that sort of just decreases, it decreases the number of kids who are going to invest in, high school programs beforehand. It sort of decreases the body of people who want to be involved in the sport. I know for me, like I came into my own within the context of an NC2A program. And without that opportunity, I think the overall level may go down. I also think in the context of writing my book, I have talked to many athletes who were lucky to be student athletes in college, and also many athletes who weren't, who competed in, most of the winter sports aren't NC2A sports. And so they had to make these choices between continuing their education and just going full tilt at, luge or skeleton or any of these sports where it's not so easy to do both. And I think in terms of creating sort of people who are prepared for the world after sports, being able to get a degree and do a sport at the same time is certainly a lot easier than trying to sort of cobble together something on your own when it's not within the NC2A system. So I am hopeful that kind of the level and opportunities for women in diving will keep rising. But I am worried that if there aren't so many opportunities at the NC2A level, what happens then?
Yeah, as you're talking, it makes me think of my own experience, and I think other people can relate to this too. There are always times in our lives when we think, well, this is the way it is, it's not going to change. And then it changes. And the question becomes, is there sufficient leadership available to make sure that it doesn't get off the rails? And so when you're thinking about opportunities for young women, what they want to do with their lives, their focus, and the energy and passion, diligence, fortitude that goes into this, to not have that available is really critical. And so I always take the position that, you always have to ask the question, what business are we really in? Mm-hmm. And for higher education, it's the business of education, obviously. And so I share your concern. Now, I have to ask you a question we did not prepare for, but you can answer. For the audience, we got acquainted through a mutual friend, Bob Zatelli from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Bob is the co-founder and president of Athletes of Action, focus on of action, and they fundraise for scholarships. And one of the schools they fundraise for is Montour High School. And Cassidy was invited in April to give the keynote address. And to show you how this is all spaghetti and it's connected together, Bob was an undergraduate when my wife Kathy and I were graduate students in West Virginia. But Bob's spouse Nancy was your first grade teacher. And I understand from Bob that during your presentation, you said you hit it out of the park, to use a baseball analogy here. You actually read something from your first grade journal to the audience. And he wouldn't tell me what it was. What was it?
Oh my gosh, I sure did. I have to go dig up the journal to figure out exactly. But essentially, I guess probably like many people in early pandemic, used that as a time to sit in my room and go through all of the crap that had been collected over the years. And my mom, later me, had saved like pretty much every paper from every grade. at Montour. And so I had found my old journal, which I think was probably my first journal from Mrs. Atelli's class. And it was great. I think she would give us a prompt, and we would write a badly spelled, sort of misshapen answer to it. And I drew a picture with everyone. So I do remember that, I definitely was not the greatest of spellers at that time. There were a lot of sort of adorable mistakes. I think I had some troubles figuring out which direction the number 3 should go. But I wrote about the Olympics once, and I got every single, in my drawing that accompanied it, I got every single ring and every single color in the right order, and I correctly spelled Olympics. So that should have given some indication that that was top of mind even back then, and maybe what my priorities were.
That's just amazing. And again, one of the things that just, it's so a great part of this story. Here you were at Montour, excelling, having an opportunity to come back and be there as fundraising is enabling money to go in the hands of Montour students, not just Montour. I think there are 3 high schools that Athletes of Action focuses on.
Montour and Still Rocks. Yeah.
When it comes back, things loop back. It's a life well lived. Any final comments you want to make before we bid the audience adieu?
No, I appreciate you having me on and asking me questions about my life. I feel, grateful to have opportunities to talk with people like you, and just so grateful. I had to have good parents to have gotten to where I am today. I had to have, a good education through Montour, great education and great coaching at Stanford, the opportunity to continue training and working after Stanford. All of these things had to come together in my life, I think, in order to create who I am today. And I'm just very grateful for everyone that's been on the road with me.
Yeah, we do it together. There's no question. It's just been a joy to have you here today. And I hope you'll say yes when I invite you back after the book is published, because I said earlier, I think that book's going to be very meaningful to a lot of people, well beyond, but well beyond the Olympic and athletic community. So thank you very much. Our guest has been Cassidy Krug, and this is Frank Fear for the Sports Column, and we hope to see you next time. Take care, everyone.